Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're going to do a very fun video, a video I look forward to doing because we're doing something retro yet again. Glock, through Lipsey's, has reintroduced their Gen 1 handgun. They're calling it the P80 because that's the military designation of the original Austrian adopted military service pistol, which was sold in Europe as the Glock 17 and also later here in the United States as the Gen 1 Glock 17. So the Glock has gone through a number of evolutionary changes over the years. That would have been in 1982 when the gun was introduced. And here we have in 2020 a Gen 5 Glock with all of its various changes, and we'll briefly touch upon them in this video. But this represents a very modern Glock, but it's still very much like the Gen 1 in function and appearance. And we'll talk about all those little minor differences and generational changes. But first, let's do some shooting with this Gen 5, which has all the fancy modern 2020 stuff on it with an acro red dot sight, suppressor height sights with night sights installed in them, a Enforce compact light. Just a really cool, still quite modern defensive pistol that's been popular for decades. And doesn't lock open on this magazine. All right, let's take a look at that Gen 1 handgun. We'd like to thank our friends over at Big Daddy Unlimited for helping to support this video and other videos that we produce. Guys, if you would like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel, please swing by and check out Big Daddy Unlimited. You can do that by going by militaryarms.org, checking out that big yellow link at the very top of the page, clicking it, and becoming a member for just 99 cents. If you would like to stay a member going forward, you can do so for 20% off using that link, which is just $7.99 a month. And what is BDU? Well, basically think of it as the Sam's Club of the online world. So again, please swing by and check out Big Daddy Unlimited. Here we go, guys. The first 10 rounds shot through my Generation 1 P80 replica Austrian service pistol. I don't know if I ever had a chance to shoot a real Gen 1 before this. I do remember handling them and them feeling really, really uncomfortable, and this one feels no different. It feels like if you had wet hands, this thing would just twist in your grip. But definitely has that Glock grip angle. What a nice shooting handgun. Okay, so yes, it's just a Glock, but what's funny is that grip really does feel different than my later generation guns. Let's go ahead and reset my challenge target here. Seems like the sights are right on out of the box. It has a slightly different grip angle because of that thickness right between the trigger and the backstrap where your thumb webbing goes. But what's interesting, the Glock, because of that grip angle, really does help you control recoil. The gun, look how little it's rising. Yep. It's kind of funny that people hated these things when they first came out in the 80s. They called it the Tupperware gun. People thought that it could sneak through metal detectors at the airports. It even in Die Hard 2 got some bad press because they called it the Glock 7 and said it was made of porcelain. Hollywood, I tell you, what a neat piece of history to be able to shoot. I love retro. When you get your new P80 pistol, it's going to come wrapped in this really nice box. It's a great presentation. When you open it up, inside, you're going to find the original style owner's manual in its white little envelope. This little piece for the P80. Sorry guys, the table's kind of off camber here. But what's really cool is you're also going to find an original Tupperware plastic case. I remember when these things were still being used during the Gen 2 guns, but the Gen 1 guns also had them, presented in this original Tupperware box. That's how they would ship to their owners. As you can see, it talks a little bit about the handgun inside the packaging. Has this nice little magnetic flap, so when you close it, It stays closed. Really, really nicely done. The presentation is, you know, really, really nice. The guns are selling for crazy amounts of money right now on Gun Broker. They were originally made available through Lipsey, who is a distributor who actually commissioned these guns to be built. The story goes it took them 3 years of working with Glock to produce this handgun and to make a near perfect Gen 1 replica with a few different little variations. So when you take the gun out of its box, you're going to have 2 magazines with it, 17-round magazines, a Glock magazine loader, cleaning brush, cleaning rod, and your pistol. The lock will be included in the cardboard outside presentation box. Taking a look at the handgun, I mean, immediately as soon as you take it out, if you've ever seen a Generation 1 Glock, which is really rare on the US market right now, if you've ever seen an original, you'll immediately recognize this very distinctive grip. It has this pebble texture to it, which is actually quite smooth. It wraps all the way around the grip of the gun. That's correct for a Gen 1 Glock. Now, Gen 1 Glocks, they adopted the pistol in 1982. They were sold in the European market all the way from 1982 on, but the US market didn't receive the Generation 1 Glocks until around 1986. These, first of all, weren't all that popular when they were first introduced. They were considered junk guns. They were not well received by the US shooting public, so not a whole lot of them were sold. And today, in 2020, if you can find an original Generation 1 gun on places like Gun Broker, I've seen them go for $3,000 plus for an original example. So they become quite collectible, which is surprising given that Glock hasn't really changed the gun much over the years. So, looking on the outside, you'll notice it has its original 1-pin design. Smooth texturing with a little bit of pebble texture, I guess, on the front of the trigger guard. No rails or anything like that. Now, it's also interesting to note, on US Glocks, we have the serial number in the frame. That's because that's what the ATF considers to be the firearm here in the United States. In Europe, specifically in Austria, the firearm is serialized on the slide. So for an original P80 military handgun, this would be incorrect. But instead of just giving this regular Glock 17 markings, they decided to call it the P80, which again is the military designation for the Austrian army. The story goes that when the pistol was adopted, the first 4,000 or so guns off the production line went to the military, were marked P80, and then afterwards the rest of the guns were sold as Glock 17s on the European market. The backstory for the handguns, pretty interesting. If you don't know it, I'll just go over it here briefly for you guys. So Gaston Glock had been manufacturing everything but firearms for many years. In 1980, the Austrian government opened up trials for a new service pistol. And in 1981, Gaston brought a team of engineers together and they designed the original Glock handgun that ultimately would have been accepted in 1982 into military service. So it's a really interesting backstory. Of course, Glock has gone on to dominate handgun sales globally, and there are probably more of these handguns out there than AK-47s. I mean, these things are extremely popular even today. And that's despite the fact they really haven't changed them much over the years. A lot of cosmetic changes and certainly some internal changes, but for the most part, what was sold in 1982 is not much different than what is being sold right now in 2020. Taking this handgun apart is just like the original. You're going to go ahead and take the magazine out, make sure that the chamber is empty, and then let that slide go home, point it in a safe direction, release the striker by pulling the trigger, slightly pull the slide to the rear till you feel it pop a little bit, pull down on the disassembly tabs, and then the gun comes apart. Inside, basically, even though it's a Gen 1 frame, which they had to make from new molds. They didn't have the original molds. It took Glock and Lipsey 3 years to bring this thing to market, and one of the things they had to do is rebuild the molds from the original drawings to make this lower. So, there's your lower, upper with the polymer captive recoil spring, and then we have a 14mm in diameter barrel. The original P80s, the very first production runs would have been 13.5mm, what we call a pencil barrel. Later, even the production military guns would go to the 14mm barrel. So this has the 14mm barrel in it. It does not have the pencil barrel. And just like all the other Glocks, you have a little screw that holds the front sight in, dovetailed rear sight, You have the U in the rear on the plastic rear sight and a dot in the front. It does have the NDLC finish on it. Does not have the tinifer. The tinifer finish has not been part of Glock's manufacturing process for many, many years. This new DLC finish has been applied, but on top of that, it looks like they've pretty much copied the original parked look, the parkerization look of the early Glock handguns. It has a nice gray to it. So overall, the gun really, really looks the part. Externally, they absolutely 100% nailed it. Internally, you're going to have more modern parts in it, but ultimately, most people wouldn't even know, nor would they care. I certainly don't. What's cool is I have a P80 military service pistol now, which is something that's important to me as a military collector. The other thing, the gun comes with modern magazines. So you're going to have Generation 3 type magazines like this. They didn't reproduce the early magazines that would bulge and wouldn't drop free. They're really kind of junky magazines. You wouldn't want them anyway, but if you want to make a correct P80, you can still find early generation Glock magazines that still don't have the steel reinforcements, that bulge and don't drop free, and don't have the double cuts for the ambi mag release. And talking about the mag release, if you take a look on this gun, there's a couple of really cool things. First of all, if you take a look at that extractor, it's the flat extractor. They even recreated the original flat extractor of the Generation 1 guns. And then over here on the other side, that little teeny tiny magazine release, that's what they looked like, guys, for a long time. So your Generation 5 handguns with the big magazine release, yeah, this is where it all started. And they faithfully reproduced that, right down to the texture. And what's funny about this gun is it is not a comfortable gun to hold. It feels slippery in your hands. It's very thick. We'll show it next to some of its later generation guns here in a moment. But overall, just looking at it externally, outstanding job, Glock and Lipsey, for bringing this thing to market. It's absolutely impeccable and just exactly what somebody like myself, a military collector, is looking to purchase. Let's try our luck with the Challenge Target Dual Texas Star with the P80. Yep, a couple misses there, but what a great shooting gun. That grip angle really does help control that recoil with your wrist cocked forward. Takes a little bit of getting used to, but by now pretty much everybody's shot a Glock, I would imagine. But if you've never shot a Gen 1, here's your opportunity. One of the things that's interesting between the Gen 1 and the Gen 2 with the Gen 2 on the bottom is that the markings are slightly different. We have the serial number on the barrel hood with the Glock logo there on the Gen 2. On the reproduction Gen 1, we have the Glock logo on the top. It's also marked P80. And on the original, or the Gen 2, it just has the caliber markings on top, 9x19. So it has slightly different markings there. It's also worth noting, if you take a look at the Gen 2, if you take a look at the markings and how they're struck, it's a true roll mark. If you run your hands over it, you can feel ridges. It's pressed into the steel. If you take a look at the new P80, the markings, although the font is the same, it's smooth because that looks like it's done by a laser. So in 1982, they wouldn't have been doing their markings with lasers. They would have roll marked, but it has the right font and looks correct. It's just not pressed into the steel like the earlier guns would have had their markings pressed into them. As I've already mentioned, Glock has really nailed it with this reproduction, but you're probably asking yourself, was this thing made in the United States or was it made in Austria? Well, the good news is your P80 Austrian military service pistol was made in Austria. So that just adds to the cool factor. P80, key points of interest. The grip that has that pebble texture all the way around it, rather thick. We have the single pin design, and we have a smooth front strap there on the trigger guard and the absence of any type of rail on the bottom. What's consistent across all 5 lines, obviously we continue to always have that polymer lower, and we will always continue out of the factory, with the exception of options of night sights. You will have polymer sights that are standard, which we see here on the P80, which again would be carried across the entire product line, but later on you'd be able to order the guns with metal night sights or swap them out yourself, which I've done on some of the guns here. So we've seen the Gen 1. The Gen 2, its biggest difference is really in the grip. So you'll notice the pebble texturing is gone. You'll notice it's more narrow right here. And the gun generally feels much better than the Generation 1 gun. The Generation 1 gun, if you look at it next to it, it just looks really thick and beefy, almost like you could put 10mm in there. It's just unnecessarily long. And so they kind of shortened this distance a little bit, gave it more aggressive texturing on the back strap and on the front strap, and then we see the introduction of texturing on the front of the trigger guard. The Gen 2 would maintain its single pin trigger design, and it also has that flat extractor on it. This has the original gray Tenifer finish, and you can see just how close Glock copied that with the P80. The P80 has more of a shine to it than the original finish, but it's still very, very close. It's a good copy. When we move over to the Generation 3, some of the bigger changes, of course, when all these guns have been checked to make sure that they're empty, guys. We did that off camera. On the Generation 3 guns, you'll notice, if you take a look at the slide, it's black. So they've changed the coating on the slide. We have finger grooves introduced into the grip on the front. We still have a very similar texturing on the back. Still have that original Gen 1 pebbling here in the middle of the grip. That was true of the Gen 2 as well. But the introduction of the 2-pin trigger system. Now, I've read that this was introduced because of the 40 cal offerings. This was due to strengthen the trigger system. The 9mm didn't really need it, but when Glock makes a change to one gun, they'll implement those changes across the entire product line. So even the 9mm got the 2-pin trigger system. You'll notice also by the Generation 3, we have the introduction of the rail system on the bottom, so you can attach lights to the handgun. So, the major differences of the Gen 3. Once we get into the Gen 4, you're going to notice a texturing change. Now, there were other versions of the gun called the RTF2 that had different texturings on the grips. We even had a model that I didn't bring out this afternoon that had what we called fishgill cuts into the slide. This is just a general representation of the various generations. This is by no means a comprehensive collection of all the generations of guns. The nitride finish, or I'm sorry, the nickel nitride finish you see on this gun is something that I added to it from Copper Custom. This is one of my old Generation 4 carry guns. So the Generation 4 introduced, you have the grip texturing here. We still have the finger grooves up here on the back. They've changed the texturing, but also introduced a slot here, and this pin will now allow you to put different thickness grips on the gun. This was done in response to competitive products that were coming to market that their guns, the competitive guns, allowed users to change out the back straps to adjust it to their particular grip. Glock did that with the Generation 4 handgun. Now you'll also notice that when I talked about the original Generation 1 gun, I pointed out the tiny magazine release. By the time you get to the Generation 4, because the Generation 2 and 3 would maintain the use of that tiny magazine release, by the time we get to the Generation 4, we now have the larger magazine release. Actually, that's a really big improvement. And we still have that texturing done to the front of the gun. May have changed a little bit in terms of how aggressive it is. And we still have the rail section up here, the 2-pin design, and all the generations that we've talked about so far do not have ambi controls on the right-hand side of the gun. The slide stop slide release is only present on the left-hand side of the gun. It's also worth noting, go ahead and make sure the weapon's clear, that the Generation 4 also introduced another major change, and that was the double nested recoil springs. Again, I've read that this was done to correct problems with the 40 cal offerings. They were having reliability issues with the guns, especially with lights attached. So this recoil system was updated to this design to remedy those functional problems. And again, Glock rolled those changes out across their entire product line. So every caliber got that updated recoil spring. And when I say updated recoil spring, I'll just quickly show you what the Gen 1, 2, and 3 springs look like. Again, so there's your Gen 1, 2, and 3 recoil spring next to the Gen 4. Then we move over to the Generation 5. The Generation 5 maintains the ability to adjust the grip thickness. We have that texturing carried over from the Gen 4. We now have the addition of an ambi slide stop slide release. We've gone back now to the single pin, so that the dual pin was introduced in Gen 3, was used in Gen 4, and by Gen 5 we're back to the single pin, which is very reminiscent of the original Generation 1. We have some differences to the frame in terms of cut. We have forward and rear slide serrations. There's been a number of different extractor changes over the year. By the Generation 3, we saw the introduction of the extractor where you could feel if there's a round in the chamber by running your finger down the side of the pistol. The Gen 5 has contouring to it, and again has those forward slide serrations. And also, if you take a look, I'll go ahead and open it up here for you guys. On the inside, we have that carried over from the Generation 4 double nested recoil spring. And then in the Generation 5, all the previous generations, 4, 3, 2, and 1, had polygonal rifling. The Generation 5 introduced what they call the marksman's barrel, which has a button cut traditional rifling to it and a recessed crown. So those are the major differences that have occurred over the years to the various Glocks. And it's interesting to see just how much they've changed, but also just how little they've changed. I know what you guys are going to ask yourself if you buy a P80. Should I shoot the gun? In my opinion, yes, you should. Is it a special item? Yes, it's a retro item, and it's a limited production retro. But in their limited production, they've already said they've made 10,000 of the guns, and in a public statement they made to the firearms blog, they said they're doing 10,000 up front, but they'll probably do more. They want to recoup the cost of having to mold the new old Gen 1 grip, and also those Tupperware boxes it ships in. They had to make molds for those as well, and making molds is not inexpensive. So while it's 10,000 units right now with more coming, yeah, go out and shoot the guns. If you're seeing these things on Gun Broker right now for over $1,000, don't buy them for $1,000. They're not highly collectible yet, and there's no shortage of them. It's not like they're making just 500. So go out and shoot the gun and enjoy it. And if you want to get another one, because again, the price should be no different than a standard Glock, because the dealers aren't paying more for them than a standard Gen 5. The price is exactly the same. Go out and pick up one to keep as a collectible and shoot one if you really want to have a collectible. Me, I would just shoot it. Overall, it's a faithful reproduction of a Gen 1, a great gun to shoot, a great gun to collect, amazing presentation. One of the things about the gun is it ships with drop-free magazines. Gone are the days of the original Gen 1 where you had to make use of the cutouts in the grip to strip the magazines out of the gun because they bulged into the polymer lower. So yeah, they're drop-free and they load very, very easily, and it's a very pleasant gun to shoot. Yes, you can modify it if you prefer this grip angle for a carry gun. It's perfectly suited for duty. You can swap out the sights for more modern sights if you want, but it's just really cool to have a P80 It's really cool that the price isn't jacked way up by Glock. It is being jacked up by dealers and other people hawking them on Gunbroker right now. And I just love the whole retro thing, and guns like this really scratch the itch of collectors like myself looking for guns like this. Guys, if you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms channel, the best way to do that is to become a Patreon supporter. We're supported by you, our viewing audience, not Glock. So there's a link down below. Give it a click. Consider becoming a Patreon family member. Also, right here on YouTube, underneath the video player, there's a little join button. You can support us right here. We've been demonetized like so many other channels. Click that join button and support us right here on YouTube. And last but not least, swing by and check out coppercustom.com. Guys, thanks for 12 years of support. We'll talk to you guys soon. Yep, very cool. Glad I didn't pay $5,000 for a Gen 1.